The Apache slave that the cowboy bought hid the blood of kings. The wind carried the scent of sand and sagebrush, and the mountains in the distance seemed like silent watchers of a world that had seen too much. In this vast land lived the Apache, proud people whose lives were deeply connected to the earth, the animals, and the traditions passed down through generations. Among them was a young man named Tayan, whose name meant healer in the language of his people. Tayan was strong and clever, with eyes that seemed to see far beyond the desert before him. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, not arrogance, but the calm strength of someone born into a lineage of leaders. He was young, but his heart held stories older than himself, whispers of ancestors who had led their people with courage and wisdom. Tayan's life had always been full of the rhythms of his tribe. He knew the trails where deer came to drink, the secret places where herbs could be found for medicine, and the songs that told the history of his people. He learned from the elders how to move like the wind, how to listen like the owl, and how to fight like the mountain lion when the need arose. But these were dangerous times. The world around the Apache was changing rapidly, and strangers were coming in greater numbers. Soldiers patrolled the land, settlers built fences across sacred grounds, and cowboys rode with arrogance, claiming the land as their own. It was during one of these dangerous times that Tayan's life changed forever. He had been out scouting near the edge of a canyon, searching for signs of water and game for his people. The desert was alive with sound, lizards scuttling over rocks, birds calling from the scrub, and the soft rustle of wind through the brush. Tayan's ears were sharp, trained to detect the smallest disturbance, the slightest hint of danger. And then he heard it, the soft clop of hooves that did not belong to the wild. At first he thought it might be a traveling trader or someone passing through, but the rhythm of the hooves was different. It was deliberate, heavy, and accompanied by the faint metallic jingling of spurs. Tayan crouched low behind a boulder, peering through the rocks. Across the valley, a group of men appeared, mounted on horses, their wide-brimmed hats casting shadows over rough faces. They carried ropes and long rifles slung across their shoulders. These were cowboys, seasoned men who had spent their lives taming land and capturing whatever they could. Among them was one man who seemed to lead the group, a figure with a hard jaw, sharp eyes, and a quiet cruelty that Tayan could sense even from a distance. This was the man who bought prisoners, turning humans into property, seeing them as tools for labor rather than people with hearts and stories. Tayan's heart sank as he realized what was happening. The cowboys were searching, and not for animals, they were hunting people. He remembered the stories the elders had told him about previous raids, about men who came from the east, taking Apache children and young adults to sell them or force them into labor. His own grandfather had survived such a raid as a boy and had carried the memory like a wound for the rest of his life. Tayan knew that if he were caught, the world he had known would be ripped away in an instant. But even in fear, his mind stayed sharp. He remembered the lessons of his ancestors. Run when you must, hide when necessary, fight only when survival left no other choice. The cowboys spread out, their horses kicking up clouds of dust as they searched the canyon. Tayan moved silently, his bare feet touching the ground lightly, avoiding dry twigs and loose stones. He climbed higher into the rocks, seeking a vantage point, hoping the cowboys would not see him. From above, he could observe them. He noticed their patterns, the way the leader directed the others, and the cautious yet greedy glances they gave the valley below. They were professionals at what they did, but they did not know the land as Tayan did. The desert had taught him to see what others missed, to sense danger in shadows and silence. Despite his careful movements, Tayan could not hide forever. As he slipped between rocks, his foot caught a dry branch, snapping it loudly. The sound carried across the canyon, and the leader's sharp eyes caught the movement. "There!" he shouted, pointing. The other cowboys reacted instantly, riding toward the noise with ropes in hand. Tayan ran, his lungs burning, legs moving with the speed and precision of someone who had trained all his life for this moment. He twisted through narrow gaps between rocks, leapt over crevices, and tried to use the terrain to his advantage. But the cowboys were relentless, and their horses were faster than any man running free. A sudden shout behind him sent a cold wave of panic through Tayan. One of the cowboys had anticipated his path and blocked a narrow pass. Tayan skidded to a stop, looking around for an escape. There was none. He realized with a sinking heart that he was trapped. The leader approached slowly, his eyes cold and calculating. He held a rope in one hand and his rifle in the other, and a cruel smile crossed his face. Tayan's mind raced. There were legends of men who could escape any trap, of spirits who could vanish into the wind, but Tayan was human and he knew the truth. He could not outrun them. The rope was thrown, catching him around the torso. He struggled, but the cowboys were strong, their grip unyielding. Tayan's freedom slipped through his fingers like water, and the reality of his capture settled over him like a heavy cloak. He was taken down from the rocks and forced onto a horse, the rope biting into his skin. He looked around at the canyon he had known since childhood, at the vast sky, and felt a profound sense of loss. Yet even in this moment of despair, he did not break. His spirit, shaped by generations of kings and warriors, remained unbowed. The journey to the cowboys' camp was long and grueling. The sun beat down on him, scorching his back, while the dust and heat clung to his skin. The other captives, young and old, walked or rode in silence, their eyes reflecting the same mix of fear and defiance. At night, when the campfires burned low, Tayan listened to the sounds of the desert, remembering the songs and stories of his people. He whispered the names of his ancestors under his breath, a secret chant that gave him strength. He hid symbols of his lineage in small ways, a carving in a stick, a knot in his clothing, a mark in the sand only he would recognize. When they finally arrived at the ranch, the cowboy's property, Tayan was brought before the man who had bought him. The cowboy examined him like one might inspect an animal, noting his strength, his youth, and his defiance. "You'll do well," he said, not as a compliment but as a prediction of usefulness. Tayan bowed his head, not in submission, but in calculation. He would learn the routines of this place, the habits of the man who held him, and the weaknesses of the world that now confined him. His ancestors had survived much worse, and so would he. That night, Tayan lay on the hard ground in a small cabin with other captives. The wooden walls smelled of sweat and straw, and the moonlight cast long shadows across the floor. He thought of his people, of the desert, of the rivers and mountains he would never forget. Even in chains, he felt the presence of his ancestors around him, whispering courage, reminding him of the blood he carried. He knew that this was only the beginning of a long and difficult journey, and that the true measure of a man was not how he survived captivity, but how he preserved his dignity, his heritage, and the secret that could one day change everything. Tayan closed his eyes that night, listening to the wind outside. The desert still spoke to him, even from afar. And in the depths of his heart, he vowed that no chain, no rope, and no man could ever take away what truly belonged to him, the spirit of a king. Life at the cowboys' ranch was a world entirely different from the one Tayan had known in the desert. The wide open plains, which seemed endless at first, were now divided into fenced lands, dusty paths, and fenced corrals filled with cattle. The sun still rose and set in the same golden way, but it now cast long shadows over a place where freedom was replaced by rules and labor. Tayan quickly learned that survival here meant more than strength. It required patience, observation, and quiet intelligence. The first days were the hardest. Tayan had been forced into chores that tested both his body and his mind. He woke before the sun, helped feed the horses and cattle, carried water and mended fences. Every motion was observed by the cowboy, who kept a watchful eye, ready to punish disobedience. Tayan was careful, moving with precision, keeping his head down, yet never letting his spirit break. Every swing of the hammer, every lift of a heavy pail, he did with the thought of his ancestors in his heart. They had faced worse and survived. He could endure this too. Despite the hard labor, Tayan did not let the work define him. He watched the land carefully, noticing patterns in the cattle, the habits of the horses, and the movements of the cowboys. His mind, always sharp, began to map out the routines of the ranch. He learned which cowboys were quick to anger and which were easy to reason with. He noticed that the lead cowboy, the one who owned him, had moments of unexpected kindness, though they were rare. Sometimes he would watch quietly while Tayan worked, assessing him, and Tayan responded by making every task perfect, not for praise, but to survive and to show his unbroken spirit. The other captives at the ranch were both friends and silent reminders of the harsh reality. Some were older, broken by the weight of labor and abuse, while others were young, like Tayan, but terrified by the world that had captured them. At first, they did not trust each other. Trust was a dangerous thing in a place where betrayal could mean punishment. Yet over time, small connections formed. Tayan learned to listen, to comfort those who were frightened, and to quietly teach the ones who had forgotten the ways of survival. Stories were shared in whispers at night, tales of homes left behind, of families lost, and of distant lands that now seemed like dreams. Even in captivity, Tayan never let go of his heritage. He carried in his heart the stories of kings and warriors from his people. Each night, he would whisper their names and remember their deeds, imagining the mountains and rivers of his homeland. He hid small symbols of his lineage wherever he could, a carved mark in the wood of his cabin, a folded piece of cloth with patterns only he could read, knots in his rope that signified strength and courage. These hidden reminders were his private rebellion against the world that sought to make him nothing more than property. Tayan also began to notice the subtleties of the cowboy who had bought him. The man was harsh, often cruel, yet he had moments where he showed unexpected care. One afternoon, a horse had fallen in the corral, twisting its leg badly. While others argued about what to do, Tayan acted. He moved swiftly, calming the frightened animal, and applied knowledge he had learned from observing wild horses in the desert. The horse stabilized and the cowboy watched silently. Tayan's quiet competence impressed him, though he did not express it directly. In his own way, the cowboy began to respect Tayan, not as a slave, but as someone with skill and intelligence that could not be ignored. Life was not without danger. The ranch had its share of outsiders, men who came seeking trouble, thieves looking for easy targets, and occasionally lawmen whose presence made everyone uneasy. Tayan observed them carefully, noticing the smallest details. The way they moved, the way they looked at the ranch, and the signs of dishonesty or aggression. He used these moments to learn, to train his mind as he had trained his body, always preparing for a future where knowledge might mean the difference between freedom and continued captivity. Even in the hard work, Tayan found small joys. He remembered how to ride the horses with skill and patience, how to calm them when they were anxious, and how to feel the rhythm of the land beneath him. He listened to the winds and the sounds of the desert, imagining himself back among the canyons and mountains. At night, when the work was done and the stars spread across the sky like silver fire, Tayan would often look up, feeling a quiet connection to his ancestors. It was in these moments that he felt most alive, most free, even while his body was bound to labor. Tayan also began to teach himself the language and customs of the cowboys, blending into their world while never losing his own identity. He learned the words for tools, animals, and tasks, understanding that knowledge was power. While the cowboys saw him as someone to obey, Tayan saw the patterns in their behavior, the ways they reacted to pressure and danger, and he stored this knowledge in his mind. One day, it might allow him to turn the world in his favor or escape when the moment was right. Yet, even as he adapted, Tayan never forgot who he was. He remembered the blood of kings running through his veins, the lineage that connected him to leaders who had once guided their people through trials and wars. He kept this knowledge secret, for revealing it would be dangerous, but it gave him strength. Every swing of the hammer, every long day in the sun, he reminded himself that he was more than a slave. He was a descendant of rulers, a person who carried history and dignity within him. One evening, the ranch was threatened by a wild storm. Winds tore across the plains and the sky turned dark as heavy clouds gathered. The cattle were frightened, the horses restless, and chaos erupted in the ranch. While others panicked, Tayan remained calm. He guided the younger captives to safe areas, calmed the horses, and secured the animals that were in danger. His quick thinking and bravery prevented a disaster. The cowboy, watching from his porch, could not hide his surprise and grudging admiration. He had seen skill and courage before, but there was something quiet and unyielding in Tayan that set him apart from everyone else. Through all this, Tayan learned patience. He knew that freedom would not come quickly, and that every day of survival was a victory in itself. He observed the strengths and weaknesses of those around him, making mental notes and small plans for the future. He never allowed himself to be broken by fear or despair. Instead, he focused on learning, adapting, and preserving his dignity. His life at the ranch was harsh, but it was also a school, teaching him lessons that no one in his tribe could have taught. As the months turned into years, Tayan grew stronger in body and mind. He had become an expert at riding, herding, and managing animals. He had gained the trust of some of the cowboys, though he never revealed the secret of his lineage. And all the while, he quietly maintained the symbols of his heritage, small but powerful reminders of who he truly was. His spirit, like the desert wind, could not be contained, and it whispered to him every night, survival was not enough. One day, the world would know the blood of kings he carried. By the end of his second year on the ranch, Tayan had become indispensable. The cowboy began to rely on him more, seeking his advice in handling the animals, in managing the younger captives, and even in decisions about the land. Yet, Tayan remained cautious. He did not reveal his full knowledge or abilities. He moved like a shadow, doing what was necessary to survive, all the while holding close the secret of his heritage. His ancestors' wisdom guided him, reminding him that patience and cunning were as important as strength and courage. Life at the ranch was hard, but Tayan's mind remained free. He remembered the desert, the mountains, the songs, and the stories. He remembered his people, their pride, and their strength. And in the quiet moments, when the stars shone over the plains and the wind whispered through the fences, Tayan allowed himself a private hope. That one day, he would reclaim the freedom he had lost and honor the blood of kings flowing through his veins. Even in chains, even in labor, Tayan had found a way to survive, and more importantly, a way to preserve himself. The cowboy may have bought him, but he could never own his spirit. That spirit, like the desert wind, was untamed, unstoppable, and eternal. And that quiet, unyielding strength would guide him through the next trials of his life, shaping a destiny far greater than the world around him could imagine. By the third year at the ranch, Tayan had settled into a rhythm of life that balanced survival with observation. He knew the land like the back of his hand, the slopes of the hills, the shallow rivers, the hidden paths that cut across the plains. He had become skilled with every task expected of him, but he had also learned to see what others could not. The cowboy who had bought him believed he was simply a hard worker, a young man capable of labor and obedience. But Tayan's mind was constantly at work, analyzing, calculating, and learning the world of the cowboys from the inside. He observed the routines of the ranch and the men who worked there. Each cowboy had his habits, his strengths and weaknesses. Some were quick to anger, relying on brute force to control animals or captives. Others were clever and careful, watching for small details that might signal danger or opportunity. Tayan learned to read these patterns like a language. The cowboy, who led the ranch, was both feared and respected by all. He was strict, his rules absolute, yet there were moments when he showed an unexpected fairness. Tayan noticed these moments and stored them in his mind, understanding that this complexity could be useful in the future. Even the other captives could be studied. They came from different tribes or backgrounds, each with their own ways of coping with captivity. Some resisted openly, resulting in punishment, while others quietly followed orders, surviving day by day. Tayan respected their courage, but also understood the dangers of revealing too much. He kept his lineage a secret, never allowing anyone to see the power he carried in his blood. To do otherwise could have meant death, or worse, the loss of everything he had worked to preserve within himself. The cowboy's world was larger than Tayan had imagined. Merchants came and went, travelers passed through the ranch, and occasionally lawmen inspected the property. Each visit was a lesson. Tayan learned to notice the smallest gestures, a hand reaching for a bag too quickly, eyes darting suspiciously, or a man who lingered too long in conversation. He observed how the cowboy handled these situations, sometimes with patience, other times with aggression. Tayan absorbed these lessons, seeing how power worked in this new world and how knowledge could become a weapon more effective than any rifle or whip. One afternoon, an opportunity presented itself that allowed Tayan to show his skill without revealing his secret. A group of cattle had broken through a fence during a sudden storm, scattering across the plains. The cowboy barked orders, frustration visible on his face, but Tayan stayed calm. He quickly assessed the situation, which animals were straying, which could be trapped easily, and what paths would keep them from panicking further. Without hesitation, he led a small group of captives and cowboys, guiding the cattle back into the pen. His voice was steady, his movements confident, and even the stubbornest animals obeyed his direction. By the time the cowboy arrived to see the results, the work was complete. There was no celebration, no applause, only the quiet acknowledgement of competence. The cowboy looked at Tayan differently that day, not with warmth, but with respect. He realized that this young man had abilities far beyond mere labor. Tayan's intelligence extended beyond work with animals. He began to notice conflicts between cowboys, disputes over land, livestock, and tools. He listened carefully during arguments, learning who held influence, who was prone to deceit, and who could be counted on in moments of crisis. He used this information not to manipulate, but to survive and to maintain peace wherever possible. The more he learned, the more he realized that power was not only in strength or weapons, but in knowledge, patience, and the ability to see what others ignored. Despite the harshness of the ranch, Tayan found moments of quiet beauty. He loved to ride alone across the plains, feeling the wind in his face, the hooves of the horse striking the earth with rhythm and power. These rides reminded him of freedom, of the deserts and canyons of his childhood. At night, he would climb to high points, gazing at the stars, feeling the presence of his ancestors in the silence. These moments were sacred, a personal rebellion against the life of labor and captivity he was forced to endure. They were also reminders of who he truly was and what he carried within himself: royal blood, wisdom, and the courage of generations. Tayan's quiet courage began to have subtle effects on the ranch. The younger captives looked to him for guidance, noticing how he remained calm under pressure and how he handled animals and people alike. They began to imitate his methods, learning from his example. He never gave himself credit, and he never boasted, but his influence grew quietly. He had become a stabilizing force in the chaotic world of the ranch. Even the cowboys, who prided themselves on toughness, noticed his calm authority. One winter evening, a messenger arrived at the ranch with news of a nearby conflict between settlers and local tribes. Tayan listened quietly, aware of the political currents around him. He understood that the world outside the ranch was dangerous and unpredictable, but he also saw opportunities. He realized that the cowboy, despite his power on the ranch, was vulnerable in the wider world. Tayan's mind raced with possibilities, ways to protect the captives, ways to learn, ways to prepare for a future when he might reclaim freedom. He did not speak these thoughts aloud. They were private strategies, hidden like the symbols of his royal lineage. Even the smallest acts became lessons. One day, a fire broke out in the barn, threatening the livestock. Panic spread among the workers, but Tayan stayed calm. He assessed the wind, the flammable materials, and the best paths to move the animals. He coordinated a small team, directing them with quiet authority. By the time the cowboy arrived, the fire had been contained, and the barn and animals were safe. Once again, there was no overt recognition, but the cowboy's eyes betrayed admiration. Tayan's skill, courage, and calmness under pressure were becoming impossible to ignore. Through all of this, Tayan never revealed his full potential. He hid the knowledge of his royal blood, knowing that it was both a gift and a danger. To reveal it too soon could have been deadly. Instead, he allowed his actions to speak in subtle ways, demonstrating intelligence, skill, and quiet leadership without giving away the secret that he carried within him. His ancestors' wisdom guided him, reminding him that patience and strategy were just as important as bravery and strength. Tayan also learned about the cowboy himself. He noticed moments of vulnerability, fleeting glimpses of doubt, and even rare expressions of compassion. These observations allowed Tayan to navigate the complex relationship he had with his captor. He could anticipate the cowboy's reactions, avoid unnecessary punishment, and sometimes even gain small freedoms or privileges. In this way, Tayan learned the delicate art of coexistence, surviving in a world that sought to control him, while quietly preparing for the day when he could assert his own power. As the seasons changed, Tayan's reputation quietly grew. The cowboy trusted him with more responsibilities, the younger captives sought his guidance, and the ranch ran more smoothly under his quiet influence. Yet Tayan remained humble, patient, and vigilant. He knew that true freedom was still far away, and that the world outside the ranch could be even more dangerous than the one inside it. But he also knew that every day of survival, every lesson learned, every small act of courage and intelligence brought him closer to reclaiming his destiny. At night, under the vast sky, Tayan would whisper to the stars, telling the stories of his ancestors and imagining the future that awaited him. He remembered the blood of kings in his veins, the lineage of leaders who had guided their people through trials and wars. This knowledge was his strength, his secret shield against despair. Even though he was a captive, his spirit remained unbroken, untamed, and alive with purpose. Tayan had become more than a worker at the ranch. He had become an observer, a quiet leader, and a keeper of secrets. He had learned to survive in a harsh and unfamiliar world, to guide others without revealing his full power, and to maintain the dignity and courage of his heritage. Each day was a lesson, each challenge an opportunity, and each small victory a step toward a future where he could reclaim what had been taken from him. The young Apache knew that the cowboy might see him as a slave, but he himself knew the truth. No chains could ever bind the mind, the heart, or the spirit of a king. And so, with patience, observation, and quiet determination, Tayan continued to live among the cowboys, hiding his blood of kings while slowly learning the ways of a world that had captured him. He waited for the day when he could reveal the full measure of his strength, not in anger or revenge, but in wisdom, courage, and the rightful reclaiming of his destiny. Years at the ranch had changed Tayan in ways that no one could see on the surface. He had grown stronger, not only in body but in mind. Every day had been a lesson in patience, observation, and survival. He understood the rhythms of the ranch, the moods of the cowboy who owned him, and the habits of the other workers and captives. But Tayan had also learned something far more important. Knowledge could be more powerful than strength, and quiet wisdom could command respect where violence could not. One morning, word reached the ranch that a band of rustlers had been spotted in the hills nearby. These were men who stole cattle and sometimes attacked settlements, feared for their cunning and ruthlessness. The cowboy was tense. He had dealt with such men before, and he knew that careless action could result in loss, injury, or worse. He called together his men, discussing strategies and preparations, and assigning tasks to protect the livestock. Tayan listened quietly, absorbing every word. He noted the strengths of the cowboys, their weaknesses, and the ways in which the rustlers might exploit them. He was careful not to reveal the depth of his understanding, keeping his observations to himself while preparing for the moment when they might be needed. When the rustlers appeared, Tayan's moment came. A small group had split off from the main band, sneaking toward the pens where the livestock were kept. Panic spread among the cowboys and the captives. Tayan remained calm. He quickly assessed the situation, noticing the terrain, the wind, and the movements of the intruders. He acted with precision, directing the captives to secure the animals, guiding the cowboys to positions that gave them advantage, and using his knowledge of the land to create subtle traps and barriers. His actions were quiet but effective, a dance of strategy that went unnoticed by most but changed the outcome entirely. By the time the cowboy arrived on the scene, the threat had been neutralized. The rustlers, confused and outmaneuvered, had fled without causing harm. The cowboy looked around, realizing that the success had not come from force alone, but from the careful and clever coordination of Tayan. For the first time, he spoke directly to the young Apache in a tone that combined surprise and respect. "You've got a sharp mind," he said. "I didn't know you could see so clearly." Tayan nodded, keeping his thoughts private. He did not boast, nor did he reveal the secret of the lineage he carried, but inside he felt a quiet satisfaction. His blood of kings had guided him, giving him the clarity and courage to act when it mattered most. This event changed the dynamics on the ranch. Tayan was no longer seen as just a laborer. He was recognized subtly as someone whose abilities could not be ignored. The cowboy began to involve him in more decision-making, seeking advice on how to handle difficult situations, and occasionally even on matters of trust and leadership. Tayan played this carefully, never overstepping, but always observing, learning, and maintaining the knowledge that his true power was hidden. The captives, too, began to see him differently. They looked to him not only for guidance in work but for wisdom in survival. Even with this newfound recognition, Tayan's life was not easy. Other cowboys, unaware of the depth of his skill and heritage, sometimes tried to assert dominance, testing his patience and resolve. Tayan handled these challenges with calm intelligence. He used words, gestures, and subtle strategy to maintain peace without resorting to violence. His ability to navigate conflict quietly and effectively became another sign of the wisdom he carried from his ancestors. One afternoon, the cowboy's child wandered into the corral and found himself in danger from a restless horse. The child screamed, panic rising in the air, and the cowboys froze, unsure how to react quickly without causing harm. Tayan acted immediately. He approached the horse calmly, using gestures and a steady voice to soothe it, all while guiding the child safely away from danger. The cowboy arrived moments later and watched silently, realizing that Tayan's skill was not just in physical labor or strategy, but in understanding people and animals in ways he could not. That night, Tayan's reputation grew further, though quietly. The cowboys' respect deepened, but still, the secret of Tayan's lineage remained hidden, preserved like a treasure in the young man's heart. Tayan's secret heritage, the blood of kings running through his veins, became a source of quiet strength in every challenge. He remembered the stories of leaders and warriors, their courage and wisdom guiding him through moments when fear could have overwhelmed him. Even when the days were long and the work was exhausting, he held onto the knowledge that he was more than a captive. His ancestors' spirits were with him, whispering advice and encouragement, reminding him that patience, strategy, and quiet courage were the paths to survival and eventual freedom. As months passed, Tayan found ways to teach without drawing attention to himself. He helped the younger captives learn to manage the livestock, showing them how to calm horses, herd cattle, and avoid danger. He instructed them subtly, using gestures and example rather than words, so that the cowboy saw only the results and not the teaching itself. The captives began to rely on him, seeing in Tayan a guide and protector, someone who could navigate the dangers of the ranch while maintaining dignity and calm. One night, the ranch faced another challenge. A wildfire started on the edge of the property. The flames spread quickly, fueled by dry grass and wind. Panic overtook many, but Tayan remained focused. He directed the captives to move livestock to safe areas, guided the cowboys to create fire breaks, and used his knowledge of the terrain to predict the fire's movement. Hours passed, sweat and smoke filling the air, until finally the danger was contained. The cowboy, exhausted and covered in soot, looked at Tayan with something like awe. Once again, the young Apache had acted with intelligence, courage, and leadership far beyond what anyone expected. Through all these trials, Tayan never revealed the full truth of his heritage. He knew that his blood of kings, if exposed too soon, could bring danger as well as respect. Instead, he let his actions speak subtly, demonstrating intelligence, bravery, and leadership without exposing the full measure of his potential. He had learned to balance survival with discretion, knowing that the right moment would come when he could reveal the power he carried within himself. Tayan also began to notice the subtleties of human behavior more keenly. He could sense when a cowboy was tired, distracted, or prone to mistake. He observed how fear, greed, and ambition shaped actions, and he used this knowledge to navigate conflicts before they escalated. His wisdom was not loud or demanding but quiet and effective, like a shadow moving unseen through the world, guiding outcomes without overt control. In quiet moments, Tayan would walk alone across the plains, letting the wind carry his thoughts. He remembered the deserts, rivers, and mountains of his childhood, recalling the songs and stories of his people. He would trace the stars with his eyes, imagining the ancestors who watched over him. These moments were sacred, giving him strength and reminding him that no matter how harsh the world of the cowboys became, his spirit was free and untouchable. The young Apache's growing reputation was matched by a deepening self-awareness. He realized that his actions on the ranch had influence far beyond what others saw. By guiding the captives, subtly assisting the cowboys, and preserving his dignity, he had begun to create a network of respect and loyalty. Even the cowboy himself, though unaware of the depth of Tayan's heritage, had come to depend on his wisdom in small ways, consulting him quietly when decisions needed careful thought. Through patience, intelligence, and courage, Tayan had transformed from a captive boy into a quiet force of guidance and stability. Yet he remained humble, never seeking attention, and always keeping the secret of his royal blood hidden. He understood that true power came not from recognition or praise, but from knowledge, strategy, and the careful preservation of dignity. As the years passed, Tayan's life at the ranch had become a delicate balance. He was a worker, a guide, a protector, and a secret heir. Every day brought challenges, but also opportunities to learn and grow. He moved through the world of the cowboys like a shadow, acting when necessary, observing always, and preserving the wisdom of his ancestors. His heart remained steadfast, his mind sharp and his spirit unbroken. And so, the young Apache continued to live in the world that had captured him, quietly revealing his talents in moments of need, guiding others without drawing attention, and hiding the full power of his heritage. He had learned that survival was not enough. Wisdom, patience, and courage were the tools that would one day allow him to reclaim his freedom and honor the blood of kings flowing in his veins. Time had passed, and Tayan had grown into a young man of strength, skill, and quiet. Wisdom. The harsh years at the cowboy's ranch had shaped him, tested him, and taught him lessons that few could understand. He had endured labor, danger, and the constant awareness of being seen as property, yet through it all, he had preserved the spirit of his ancestors, the blood of kings running quietly through his veins. The desert had shaped him, the ranch had honed him, and now the world beyond the fences called to him with the promise of freedom. The moment came unexpectedly. A new law, passed far away in distant towns, made the practice of owning human beings illegal in the region. The cowboy, though not unkind in all ways, realized that he could no longer keep Tayan as a captive without risking severe consequences. He approached Tayan quietly one morning, the sun low over the plains, casting long shadows across the ranch. "You're free to go," he said, his voice a mixture of relief and hesitation. He was not cruel, but he had grown accustomed to having Tayan's guidance and presence around him. There was a quiet respect in his words, an acknowledgement that this young man had always been more than a servant. Tayan stood still for a moment, absorbing the words. Freedom had always been a distant dream, whispered in the quiet of the desert and imagined in the silence of the night. Now it was real. He looked at the cowboy, noting the mixture of relief, respect, and uncertainty in his eyes. Tayan nodded once, a simple gesture that conveyed gratitude without words. He knew that freedom was not just a gift, it was an opportunity, a chance to reclaim what had been taken and to honor the legacy of his people. Packing his few belongings, Tayan prepared to leave the ranch. He took a last look at the land where he had labored for so many years, the fences, the barns, the fields, and the animals he had guided and protected. Memories of struggles and triumphs filled his mind. He remembered the small victories, calming a frightened horse, guiding the captives through danger and outsmarting threats both human and natural. These moments had shaped him, strengthened him, and prepared him for what lay ahead. As he rode away from the ranch, Tayan felt the wind on his face, carrying the familiar sense of the plains. The horses ran strong beneath him, and for the first time in years he felt the true taste of freedom. The vast sky stretched endlessly above, and the mountains and valleys of the desert called to him like an old friend. He remembered the songs and stories of his people, the teachings of his elders, and the legends of kings who had once led with courage and wisdom. Their voices seemed to guide him now, urging him forward on a path of purpose and destiny. The journey back to his homeland was not easy. Tayan had to navigate unfamiliar territories, avoid hostile strangers, and find food and shelter in a world that had changed since he had last roamed freely. Yet every challenge reminded him of the lessons he had learned at the ranch: observation, patience, courage, and intelligence. He moved with quiet confidence, relying on his senses, his knowledge of the land, and the wisdom of his ancestors. The years of survival and learning had prepared him for this moment. Along the way, Tayan encountered other Apache who had survived similar hardships. They shared stories of captivity, loss, and resilience. Listening to their experiences, Tayan realized that his journey was part of a larger story, a story of survival, pride, and the endurance of his people. He felt a deep connection to those who had endured, knowing that their struggles and his own were threads in a larger tapestry of history and heritage. Finally, Tayan returned to the lands of his ancestors. The mountains rose in the distance, the rivers sparkled in the sunlight, and the desert stretched wide and free. Standing at the edge of the land he had once known, he felt a surge of emotion, joy, pride, and a profound sense of belonging. This was more than a homecoming. It was a reclaiming of identity, a recognition of the strength and wisdom that had carried him through years of hardship. Tayan did not return as a boy. He returned as a man shaped by experience and guided by the blood of kings. He began to help his people rebuild, offering guidance in leadership, strategy, and survival. His knowledge of both the world of the cowboys and the wisdom of his ancestors made him an invaluable leader. He taught young people to be strong, intelligent, and brave, while also sharing lessons in patience, observation, and the quiet power of restraint. His presence inspired respect, and slowly the community began to thrive under his guidance. Even the cowboy, though far away, remained a part of Tayan's story. The man had learned lessons in humility and respect, recognizing that power and ownership were illusions when faced with true courage and wisdom. Tayan's years at the ranch had not been wasted. They had shaped both him and the world around him, leaving impressions that would not be forgotten. Tayan also honored the memory of those who had suffered alongside him. He shared his experiences with those who were younger or weaker, teaching them how to survive, adapt, and maintain dignity even in the harshest conditions. His own journey became a living lesson in resilience, showing that freedom was not only a right but also a responsibility to oneself, to others, and to the legacy of those who came before. As the years passed, Tayan became a figure of quiet legend. Stories of his survival, wisdom, and leadership spread, inspiring others who had faced similar hardships. He never boasted, never sought fame, but his deeds spoke for themselves. People saw in him a man who had endured captivity, preserved his heritage, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more courageous. The blood of kings within him had guided every choice, every action, and every moment of perseverance. Tayan's life was a testament to the power of spirit and heritage. He had faced chains and captivity, danger and doubt, yet he never allowed these trials to define him. He understood that true freedom came not only from the absence of physical restraint, but also from the preservation of dignity, wisdom, and courage. Every step he took in the land of his ancestors was a declaration of survival and identity, a living proof that the spirit of a king could never be confined. In quiet moments, Tayan would sit by the river, watching the water flow over stones, and think of the desert, the ranch, and the people who had shaped his journey. He remembered the lessons learned, the struggles endured, and the victories, both small and great. He understood that life was a series of challenges, each one an opportunity to grow stronger, wiser, and more resilient. And in his heart, he carried the knowledge that his ancestors, the kings of his lineage, were always with him, guiding him toward a destiny of purpose, honor, and freedom. The young Apache who had been captured, sold, and forced into labor had become a man who could not be confined by fences, chains, or circumstance. He had learned the power of patience, observation, courage, and intelligence. He had preserved the legacy of his people, hidden the blood of kings within himself, and emerged as a leader capable of shaping the lives of others. And though the world had tested him endlessly, Tayan knew that the true measure of a man was not how he endured suffering, but how he used that experience to build a future filled with strength, wisdom, and honor. Tayan's story, though marked by hardship, ended in triumph, not just personal freedom, but the restoration of dignity, the guidance of his people, and the preservation of the legacy that had once seemed lost. His life became a testament to resilience, courage, and the quiet power of heritage. Even in the face of oppression, even when the world sought to reduce him to nothing, Tayan had held fast to the spirit of kings, proving that true strength lies not only in the body but in the mind, heart, and soul. And so, Tayan walked through the lands of his ancestors, free in body, mind, and spirit, carrying the lessons of the ranch, the wisdom of his heritage, and the quiet power of the blood of kings. The world had tried to bind him, but it could not touch the essence of who he was. The young Apache had endured, survived, and emerged victorious, not through violence, but through courage, intelligence, patience, and an unbreakable spirit. His journey was complete, yet his legacy had only just begun.